here in Lubbock. Because apparently Democrats don't exist in Lubbock, right?
No.
So let's show them the number, please. So please sign in if you have not. If you can't find somebody with a clipboard in the crowd, Haley over here. Haley, raise your hand. She will get you signed in as well afterwards. Also, we have voter registration. If there's anything that has changed about your voter registration over the past year, we have Allison Whitney. Allison, raise your hand. She will register you to vote today. And anybody that has one of these, they will also be able to register you to vote. If you have had an address change or anything, you can get it done today. But on top of that, Beto can do it too. He just got deputized today, so. All right, well, I'm going to kick it off right now with the Lubbock County Democratic Party Chair, Gracie Gomez, and she's going to take it away for us.
Woo! Go Gracie! Who's going to help me with the live stream? Oh, I mean, I'm doing it. So, I'll hold it for a little bit. You may have to talk into it real close.
Real loud into it. Okay, now.
Welcome, everyone. This is the first mass gathering we've had in over a year, and I'm so happy that it is with like-minded friends. Thank you all for being here and for joining us in this event. Before I introduce Beto,
And she's going to take it away from
a young man who is with the state Democratic Party. He's with our state party. Little does he know that I will be turning to him many times for help, for support, for money, for a lot of things, okay? So, I am going to introduce...
It's okay. Luke Warford.
Luke Warford. Please come on up and say hello.
You got it.
Thank you so much, Gracie. And thank you to the Lubbock County Democratic Party. It is good to be back in Lubbock. Hello. How's everybody doing? Good? I like this. This is a lot of excitement. It's been a long year. We've all been stuck at home. You know, I think something that just is so wonderful about this event, about what Powered by People is doing, and about you know, Beto coming to Midland and now to Lubbock, is all of us getting a chance to be together. It's been a long year. I know folks have been stuck at home, and being out, being together, talking about democracy, having some of the conversations that we're going to have are just incredible. I just want to say a couple quick things, and then we'll get into the main part of the program. One is that, you know, I remember 2018 when Beto was running for Senate, and the sort of amazing volunteer army that he built, the amazing following he had. And a lot of candidates, after they run, maybe they don't keep that energy going. They don't convert that into more good and more good. And Beto has just been going and going, and Powered by People has been going since 2018, not just in places like Houston and Dallas, but all over the state, organizing everywhere. And I think we at the State Democratic Party have learned a lot from that. And so when we think about Lubbock and we think about places like Midland, we know that our path to flipping the state, that our path to winning will come through Lubbock. And so thank you all for being here and for all the work that you're doing. As many of you might know, the Texas legislative session just ended, and it was a rough one, right? Republicans are in control. There was a lot of bad legislation that we don't like that we'll talk about, and that Beto will talk about later.
Get your mouth in that mic.
Thank you very much. All right, is that better?
Yes.
Ah, great. So the Texas legislative session just ended, as many folks know, and there's a lot of bad legislation, a lot of things that we would have liked to stop. And I think one of those things was Senate Bill 7. And as many folks here will know, the House Democrats had to pull sort of this once-in-a-generation maneuver to stop Senate Bill 7, but we were able to. And I think that, we can clap for that. And just a huge shout out. I know folks who are here who are at this event were involved in writing letters and making phone calls. And I truly believe that we stopped Senate Bill 7 and that our House members were emboldened to walk out to take that action that they, that has only been taken 4 times in Texas history because of the support they felt from all over the state, from places like Lubbock. So thank you all so much for that. The thing that I kept thinking, though, over the course of the session, and that is so obvious today, is that fundamentally we need to win more elections in Texas, and we need to win those elections everywhere. We need to compete in Lubbock, we need to compete in Midland and Odessa, we need to compete everywhere. And in order to do that, we're going to talk a lot today, I'm sure, about voter registration. You can get registered to vote here, which is incredible. And the Texas Democratic Party is planning on announcing next week that voter registration is our top strategic priority for this cycle. And again, that means I'm talking a lot about Lubbock, but that means we need to register voters everywhere because, our calculations say there's more than 30,000 likely Democratic voters who are unregistered in Lubbock County alone. And it'll take registering those voters and registering voters everywhere in order for us to close the statewide margin and win. So before I wrap up, I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. If you're interested in learning more about the work we're doing, you can go to texasdemocrats.org. Thank you all so much, and I'll pass it back to Gracie.
Yeah, go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to make this as short as possible because I know y'all are here for one person. So much has happened in the past 5 years. We've made it through dictatorship-type administration, taken straight from the Putin playbook. Additionally, our country was shut down by a pandemic that those in leadership could have led us through it. And rather than to do that, they failed us. They chose to lie about it, dilute it, politicize it, causing incredible devastation to our country and its citizens, and a lot of even more division. Millions of Americans have been devastatingly impacted by this pandemic, either in their health, physically, financially, emotionally, mentally. As of right now, over 600,000 Americans have lost their lives, including my brother and his brother-in-law. My sister-in-law lost her husband and her brother in a span of 6 months. And this is just one personal story out of hundreds of thousands across this country. But it's not all negative. We, through our voices and our votes, said one term. One term, y'all. We did that. And typical in a dictatorship-type mentality, they attempted to shut down our voices with lies and with an outright attack on our country and on our election system. And what did our Texas leaders do? They doubled down on their support of the very person who instigated this attack. Okay? So we have to work on voting those people out. That is the only way we're going to ensure that they don't become absolute rule of power in this state, because that's what they're working on now. And if we were tired before, we're going to have to work even harder now. So get your Red Bulls ready, get your new comfortable tennis shoes, because we have got to hit the ground running on this. I have to look at my notes, I'm sorry. I'm not a public speaker. And I have said many times in the past, and I will say it in the future, our voices and our votes can remove these people and we can fire them from these positions where they're working against us. 4 years ago, one man inspired thousands of Texans and Americans, including me, to become engaged and become involved. He gave us hope, he gave us courage, and he led with courage against this fight of what has been happening in our country and continues to happen. He continues that fight. So, I want everyone here to give him the warmest welcome to Lubbock, and I want to find out how we can continue to help him in this fight that's before us. Welcome to Lubbock, veteran.
Thank you, Gracie and Samantha, and each one of you for being out here. We may not have a speaker on this side. We're working on it right here. But I can tell that you all don't care because you just want to be outdoors and enjoying this beautiful evening and this wonderful sky above us and the birds chirping. And it's okay if you can't hear Beto. I got to tell you, I came to Lubbock to talk about and listen to you on the topic of democracy and voting rights at its moment of greatest peril, at least in my lifetime. But as an added side benefit, the fact that we get to be with one another after more than a year of being isolated in our homes or in our jobs without being able to see each other eyeball to eyeball or to touch or shake hands or hug as Gracie and I just did, it's just wonderful to be out here and to be in your presence. Looks like we got some electricity, Connell. Is that working?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Okay, we got something very loud coming out of there. Now nothing. So, I may no longer be a member of Congress. My last day in that institution was in January of 2019. I may no longer be a candidate for higher office, but our sound guy at this event in Lubbock is none other than Jim Ward from At the Drive-In, who's fixing our speakers right now. So a hand for Jim Ward of At the Drive-In, Sparta, and a great new solo record that's just about to come out, and our hometown hero from El Paso. He heard that we were on the road, that we were going to be in Lubbock, and lo and behold, he just showed up here today and said, I want to lend a hand and help out. And that's the spirit of this whole venture. Just some guy from El Paso with a microphone in a public park with all of these great people from the city of Lubbock who came out because they care about their country and our democracy, and they want to see what we can do together to save it. I was thinking about that on Monday. My wife was out of the house, and it fell to me to wake up our 3 kids. Ulysses is 14, Molly is 12, Henry's 10 years old, and I was going to wake them up extra early on this Memorial Day where they thought they were sleeping in, so we could go over to the Fort Bliss National Cemetery and pay our respects and go to the Memorial Day program like we do every year. And I was so surprised. None of them complained. None of them made a fuss. They all put on their nicest clothes, combed their hair, got in the truck, and we drove down to the cemetery. And it was a very brief, socially distanced program, maybe not unlike the way it looks right now today. And afterwards, an Army veteran recognized me, came up and introduced himself and his family and his 2 young kids, and he said, hey, I want to give your kids some pennies. And I said, all right. And he said, but the tradition that I want you to know about, and he said this to our kids, is for those veterans who are buried here, to whom you want to pay your respects, you can place a penny on their gravestone. If you knew them, you can put a nickel. If you served with them, you can put a dime. And if you were there when they died, you place a quarter. That's what we do here at the cemetery. I didn't know that, and my kids loved it. We went out and actually searched for the grave of a veteran that we know and love who died of COVID this last year. Served in the Korean War, was at the Chosin Reservoir battle. Phenomenal El Pasoan, this guy Javier Diaz, who went to Bowie High School, and in fact knew the famous 1949 Bowie Bears, who fought for and won the first high school boys state championship in the history of Texas. It was held in 1949. And you'll never believe it because of who we are and how we treat one another today. But that team, every single member, a Mexican American from Segundo Barrio, the 2nd Ward in El Paso, when they were traveling to Austin, it's a 8.5-hour drive now. I can imagine 1949, it was a little bit longer. Every restaurant, almost every restaurant, every motel that they tried to stop at, there was a sign hanging that said, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." In fact, they get to Austin, where they are going to play for the state championship on that day in 1949, and they can't get a motel room because they're Mexican Americans. They sleep under the bleachers right next to the field on which they're going to compete the next day. And then they wake up and they kick those kids' ass from Austin, Texas, and won the state championship. They got it done. I'm in this cemetery with my kids on Memorial Day, and we can tell by the birth date and the date of death the age of these veterans who served this country. And we know who clearly died in the First World War and the Second World War in Korea and Vietnam, on up to the wars that we are still engaged in today. And I know I don't have to tell you this, it really hits you. And I know we've got veterans among us right now, and I want to thank you for your service and for what you were willing to do, putting your life on the line for all of us. And I couldn't help but think about where we are as a country right now. All of us still alive under this beautiful sky in Lubbock, Texas tonight are in some way the heirs of the sacrifice of those who preceded us, who are buried at the Fort Bliss National Cemetery, and buried at cemeteries here in Lubbock and other parts of West Texas and across the country, and fields in France, and lonely islands in Japan. Those who gave their full measure of devotion to this country. We inherited their sacrifice. They built up and defended this democracy for all of us. And look at the state that it is in today. What have we done with our inheritance that was purchased so dearly by these extraordinarily brave men and women? On the 6th of January of this very year, not even 6 full months from where we stand today, you had the first successful invasion of the United States Capitol since the War of 1812. 5 people were killed, including a Capitol police officer who literally gave his life trying to defend this citadel of democracy from the attackers within. They constructed a gallows in the plaza before the Capitol where they wanted to hang the then Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. They threatened to, and I'm certain if they'd gotten their hands on them, would have murdered sitting members of Congress, Republicans and Democrats alike, by the way. But for the grace of God and the heroism of those other surviving Capitol police officers, they were unable to do that. And as we read the headlines and watch the news every day, they are slowly, one by one, being brought to justice. But that coup attempt, that insurrection, that effort at sedition, call it what you will, didn't end that day, nor did it end when Joe Biden was successfully sworn in as the current president of the United States of America. Because, well, let's give a round of applause for that. And I don't mean to digress, but when I was in Congress, in January of 2017, I made the decision to go to the swearing in of Donald J. Trump, who's going to be our next president. And I took a ton of grief from constituents back home in El Paso, and I understood very well the point that they were making. How in the world, Beto, can you go and honor this man who has said such vile things, especially about our community? Calling Mexicans rapists and criminals, the border this incredibly unsafe place, even though El Paso is at that time the safest city in the United States of America. And my response was, look, I hear you, and I feel much the same way you do about this guy. But the fact that we can, 245 years into this experiment, still pull this thing off, where someone who worked for 8 years to build up this country and make it better and execute a vision that he campaigned on, he's going to peacefully turn over power to someone who has vied to destroy everything he's done. It makes me sick to my stomach, and at the same time, it's absolutely beautiful. This is the exception in world history. This is the exception today on planet Earth. Most countries cannot pull this off. The peaceful transfer of power, the rule of law. That's what those veterans fought for and died for. I'm going to make sure I honor that by going to this inauguration. I'm not there to honor Trump. I'm there to honor them and us and this country. But though Joe Biden was successfully sworn in, and by all accounts, he's doing a pretty good job as the president of the United States right now, that threat to our democracy is not over. There are pending or already passed more than 360 pieces of legislation in 47 state legislatures, there are only 50 of them, that would suppress or restrict the right to vote in America. In Georgia, you saw one of them that was just the most malicious. In a state where people routinely wait in line 5, 6, 7 hours in order to vote, and it can get pretty hot in Georgia, you are now by law unable to offer somebody a bottle of water or a refreshment to make sure that they literally do not collapse or pass out from heat exhaustion while they're waiting in line. Now, I don't know that they did it just to be mean. I think they did it to try to stop certain people from standing in that line for 6 hours and voting. Because what we've learned from Georgia and Florida and Arizona and our home state of Texas, where 750 polling places have been closed over the last 8 years, is that most of those polling place closures take place in the fastest growing Black and Latino neighborhoods, thereby ensuring that in those same neighborhoods, people will wait longer in line because there are fewer polling places at which they can vote. That's why they did that in Georgia. That's why they're trying something very similar here in Texas, where under SB 7, they proposed doing away with Sunday morning voting. What's the problem with that, you ask? You like to sleep in on a Sunday morning. You don't want to vote. You'd rather vote on a Tuesday on election day. You'd rather vote in the evening during early voting. You'd rather vote because you qualify and are eligible to do so by mail. Well, there's a program that some of you participate in, others may know of, called Souls to the Polls, where very often in Black churches across Texas, after the congregation meets, they leave as one, and by car, by foot, by bus, they travel to the nearest polling place and they vote together. It's a great, long-held tradition in the state of Texas, one that would be outlawed by this voter suppression bill that almost made its way through the state legislature. They were going to allow partisan poll watchers to intimidate voters in the polling place with free rein. Election judges couldn't step in and stop them. And it's not as though this is a new invention. In fact, if we go back 80, 90, 100 years, the Ku Klux Klan, in service of the then Democratic Party in Texas, perfected the science of voter intimidation, keeping Black voters from the polls. In fact, inspiring a state law passed by our legislature in 1923, better known as the all-white primary, which for 20 years in the 20th century, including years where Black officers were serving overseas, precluded African Americans from voting in elections in their own democracy, 1924 to 1944, before it was struck down by the Supreme Court decision Smith versus Allwright. They wanted to revive that again in Texas. When folks call this Jim Crow 2.0, it's not hyperbole, it's not a stretch of the imagination, it's not people being dramatic. It is a reference to the rhyme that we hear right now in the history that we're living through. They've tried this stuff before in the states of the former Confederacy, and they're trying it again right now. When we add to that the problems that we have with our politics, the fact that bipartisanship is something that people like to talk about, but we rarely, if ever, experience in our politics, at least in the things that matter most to us, the ability to save your life by being able to afford the insulin that keeps you alive, or confronting climate change before it destroys this planet and ends any possibility of future generations that follow ours. Immigration reform in a state that should understand this issue better than any other, given our proximity to Mexico and the fact that so many among us came here through the immigrant experience and made us better by their very experience. I'd love to see some of those folks talking about bipartisanship work on some of those bipartisan solutions. But so far, we're left holding the bag. And then there's this. You know, when I ran for Senate in 2017 against Ted Cruz, many people, maybe some here, thought that was nuts to begin with. In a state that last elected a Democrat to the Senate in 1988, and the fact that Ted Cruz was not only a sitting senator, but was a runner-up to Donald Trump in the Republican nomination contest in 2016, who the hell do you think you are, Beto, to take this guy on and have a snowball's chance in West Texas? Well, we decided to make it interesting by not taking any political action committee money, no PAC money, no corporate donors. We were going to fund this sucker completely through you. $5, $25, if you were feeling generous, $50 at a shot. And we ended up, at the end of the day, getting really close to beating that guy, raised more than any other Senate candidate in the history of this country. And we're able to demonstrate that you don't need corporate money, you don't need political action committees, you don't need super PACs to get the job done. You need people. So at this moment of maximum peril, where there's too much money in our politics, too little bipartisanship in the halls of Congress or our state legislature, where you literally have violent insurrection as a daily threat to the continuation of your government, our government, and where you have the states in the union, what are we to do about it? Do we succumb to despair? Is the game over? Are the odds too stacked? Is the hill too steep? Is the road too long? Or is it tough, and so we must be tougher? Is it hard, so we must try harder? Is there some antidote to the despair that I too am tempted to feel about where our country and where our state is right now? I think that antidote is all of us. I think that antidote is the action that we commit to right here in this park, under this sky, in one another's company. Being able to see each other eyeball to eyeball, to keep each other in check and hold one another accountable to make sure that we actually pull this off. There is hope. There is a way to get this done. And I mentioned that, you know, if history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, it certainly rhymes. We have the rhymes of Jim Crow and Jim Crow 2.0, but we also have the rhyme of the response to Jim Crow. There's this great story that Stacey Abrams shared with me the other night. I did this Instagram Live interview with her where she just absolutely blew us away with the knowledge that she was able to drop on us, the commitment that she'd made, the despair that she doesn't even know the name of because she's so determined to get this right, to make sure we win. She said in 1964, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Andrew Young, who would later become the mayor of Atlanta and the ambassador to the United Nations, were meeting with Lyndon Baines Johnson, our fellow Texan, then president of the United States, in the White House. And they said, President Johnson, we absolutely must have a voting rights bill in America. You know, they say that literacy test or that poll tax in Texas applies to everyone. It is selectively applied to black voters. When you go in to register to vote and they ask you how many jelly beans are in the jar, they're not asking that question of everyone before they allow you to register. They're asking it of some people, people who look like us. There are some counties in Mississippi, in Georgia, in Texas, where black residents are more than 70% of the population, and there are no black residents on the voter rolls. Mr. President, you have to do something. You can't leave it to the people of Texas or Mississippi or Georgia to get this right. And President Johnson said to Dr. King, I'd love to help you out, but I don't have the power. I can't get Congress to do this. They'll never buy this. And so they leave, and Andrew Young is dejected, and he turns to Dr. King and he says, well, what do we do now? And Dr. King turns to him and says, we get the president some power. And over the course of the next year, civil rights leaders and advocates across the country lit up the switchboard in the halls of Congress, took to the streets, marched, put their lives on the line, and in fact, some actually lost their lives in the process to give President Johnson the power that he lacked. In fact, when President Johnson convenes a joint session of Congress, the House and the Senate, on March 15th, 1965, he references the fact that a week before, on Bloody Sunday, John Lewis and a band of civil rights marchers attempted to move from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery to fight and stand up and put their bodies on the line for the right to vote. And you all know the end of that story. Before they could cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge, John Lewis is beaten within an inch of his life. In fact, it's a miracle that they did not kill him on that day. But what he was willing to do, the sacrifice that he and so many others made, was not lost on the President of the United States. And in that speech to a joint session of Congress, the most powerful man in the world speaking to the most powerful men and a few women in the world before him, and to the rest of the country that's watching, he says what they did on Bloody Sunday must force us to do the right thing because we now have the power to do it. And he muscled that bill through that Congress, including through a democratically controlled Senate, populated by Democrats from the South who knew that they would not be reelected and who Johnson famously predicted would not see a Democratic victory in the South again for a generation. He was only half right because it would be many generations before Democrats would win in the South again. They were willing to sacrifice something as well. Their position of public trust, their political power, their office, their title, to do the right thing for the country because the country forced them to do the right thing. That's what I think we have to do. Now I see President Biden saying, look, I support the For the People Act, a bill that has passed the House of Representatives. It's now pending before the U.S. Senate that would get big money out of our politics. It would stop the process where members of Congress pick their voters instead of the other way around, what we call gerrymandering, by setting up independent, citizen-led redistricting commissions in every state. It would make sure that there are no barriers to the ballot box, including the ones they're trying to put in place in Texas and Georgia and Florida and Iowa and Montana and all these other states that have already passed this voter suppression legislation. It would bring through automatic and same-day voter registration tens of millions of our fellow Americans onto the rolls who've never voted a day in their life. In 2020, the most important election in this country's history since the election of 1860, in the great state of Texas, 7 million eligible voters didn't vote. Not 7,000, not 700,000, 7 million. Can you believe it? And imagine if there were no obstacle in their way. Imagine if Election Day was a national holiday, which is part of the For the People Act. Imagine if they could vote, cast their vote for a Republican, for a Democrat, no me importa, as long as they can vote, as long as they have a say and a voice. The cynicism that is seeping in to this country, the folks who are turning away and ultimately turn their back on the very idea of democracy and see the pursuit of power through other means, including violence. There's a peaceful democratic answer to that.
And a new microphone.
So I was talking about President Johnson needing some power. I literally need some power on this microphone. But I'm going to try to use my outside voice with you as I wrap up these comments. We have a chance right now to get this right, but it is on us. Just as it was on Dr. King and Ambassador Young and John Lewis and everyone who fought for civil rights and voting rights in 1964 and 1965 and created the first multiracial democracy
in American history, a multiracial democracy that's about to be rolled back if we do not stand up, step up, and take action right now. I'm going to give you 3 ideas for what we can do, and then I'm going to listen to every idea you have till the sun goes down, if you want to, about what you want to do and how we can work together. But one way or another, I want to make sure that we're successful, because we do not get a second crack at this democracy. We lose it now. And there's nothing about the fact that for 247 years, we were the world's greatest democracy that will give us another 247, or even another 1 or 2. We will lose it forever. There's no plan B. There's no other option. There's no alternative. So this is what I propose. Thanks to the courageous Texas House Democrats, we were able to stop SB 7. They took on Sunday night the extraordinary measure of walking out of the legislative session. Luke told us earlier that's only happened 4 times in Texas legislative history. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, and they were willing to take that extraordinary step. I want to make sure that if you can, you reach out to them and you thank them for doing that. Help to stiffen that backbone, because they're going back into a special session where another elections bill, another voter suppression bill will be before them. And we need them to be just as courageous, just as strong this time as they were the last time. And if you happen to be, as I know you are, represented by a Republican who voted for that voter suppression bill, I don't think it hurts to call their office as well. If we still believe in democracy and the government is the people and the people are the government, then by rights they've got to listen to you. And who knows, hoping against hope, maybe it will change how they see things. So this fight in Texas is not over. Action number 1 is to make sure we do everything we can here in this state to stop voter suppression before it's too late. Step number 2. Step number 2 involves our federal government. If, God forbid, we're not successful in Texas, then much as LBJ stepped in 1965, we need Joseph Biden to step in 2021. Now, he says that he believes in this. He says he wants to sign it, but he's the most powerful man in this country, the most powerful man on this planet. We need to make sure that we remind him that he has the power to do this. So if you pick up the phone and call the White House switchboard, and they're getting calls not from New York City, not from San Francisco, not from Austin, Texas, but hold on, sir, they're calling from Lubbock, Texas right now. I think they're gonna sit up and take notice, and they're gonna say, you know what, this is real. And the funny thing is, we just got calls from people in Midland, Texas. So something's happening in West Texas right now. This place that we thought was too red to matter for us, turns out the folks there know that they matter and know that they have power, and they're lending it to us right now in the White House. The president needs to hear from you, and I want to make sure that he does. We've been passing around these clipboards. If you haven't signed on to one yet, please do. And I promise you I'll get in touch with you and I'll connect you with the White House switchboard. We'll send you the phone number or the link so that you're patched in. Third thing, and a really, really important thing, beautiful drive in today from Midland. Not everyone agrees. In fact, I was talking to somebody I met today at the Buddy Holly Museum, and she said, oh gosh, that drive is so boring. And I said, you know what? I live in the Chihuahuan Desert, in the Rocky Mountains, and it's beautiful where I live in El Paso, but this is so different, and its difference is exciting to me. And actually, I love this big sky that you all have, and these clouds that are above us, and it's just gorgeous. Thank you so much. All right, we got the power back. Thank you. Thank you, Jim. And I went to the Buddy Holly Museum because I've been to Lubbock so many times and I've never walked in. And he's one of my all-time rock and roll heroes, and I wanted to see the guitar he played, the glasses that he wore that were recovered from the crash site in Iowa, the picture of Waylon Jennings on that motorcycle. And anyhow, I got to go there.
But I also went to the county elections department, and I got certified as a volunteer deputy registrar here in Lubbock County. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am street legal in Lubbock. Watch out, because I will register you. I was on the east side of town, just knocking on doors. You know, we call this just going blind on voter registration. Asking everyone who opened their door, are you registered to vote? And if they said no, we try to get them registered. This woman opened her door, and her name is Gloria, and she's sitting there with her best friend Carolyn, and she answers the door with a Bible, and she says, "Are you?" And she can't place my name, and I said, "You know, that's all right. I'm Beto O'Rourke," and I don't know if that's who she thought I was in the first place, but she played along, and she was really nice, and she said, "Well, come on in." And she said, you know, Gloria and Carolyn and I start Bible study at this time every single Friday. And so you're welcome to come in, and we'd love to talk with you for a little while. And I just got a chance to sit down with them and ask them what was important to them in this community and how we bring a deeply divided community, in their opinion, together. And they said, look, as African Americans in Lubbock, and we've lived here our entire life, you know, I haven't always felt comfortable. I haven't always felt like I was treated with respect and with dignity. And, you know, you asked me, Beto, what I'd like to change, and I want to change that. And I said, that's great. I would love to help in some way. Do you have any solutions or answers? And I told her what we were doing here today, and I said, you should come out to the park and join us this evening and be part of this conversation. And Gloria said, well, I think that's what it's going to take. I think people listening to one another, voting, registering to vote, having faith in the system, getting along. I think that's the way that we're going to make this happen. And Gloria and Carolyn prayed over us before we left their home, and it made me feel so good and so welcomed and so much in the right place. And then I got to come here and I got to be with you all, and I get to do this. This is the third action item. Encourage you to go over to the county elections department, and it's a 5-minute walk from the Buddy Holly Museum, and get yourself certified to become a volunteer deputy registrar. It's called VDR. I'm now VDR'd in El Paso, my home county. You can only register people in the counties that you are certified to be a VDR. So I'm certified in El Paso. I'm certified in Webb County, which is where Laredo is. I'm certified in Midland County, where I just got signed up. I was the 9th VDR of the year in Midland County. And then I came up here and I got certified today so I can register folks. This is why I want you to take this step. I said there's no plan B, and that's not completely true. If we are unsuccessful at unrigging this system, untilting this playing field, and the odds are still stacked to our disadvantage in these elections. They close Sunday voting. They make it harder to register. They purge hundreds of thousands of voters off the rolls. All those things that we know they're gonna do if they get the chance to do it, and we don't pass the For the People Act. I wanna make sure that we at least have a fighting chance, and if we go down, we go down fighting. But we don't accept that we're gonna go down, and we register enough new voters to make that difference. Of those 7 million who were eligible to vote in Texas and didn't in 2020, nearly 2 million of them were not registered to vote in the first place. And the greatest reason given by those who do not vote or register to vote in an election for not voting or not registering is that no one ever asked them. No one ever knocked on their door. Gloria said, you are the first politician or volunteer deputy registrar to ever knock on my door. No one's ever done this before. We got to be doing this right now. And I'll just warn you, you cannot do this from your couch or your sofa or your computer. We cannot tweet our way to victory. We can't post nasty stuff on Facebook about Donald Trump and somehow feel satisfied like we've done what we need to do. We can't even do, and I love a good phone bank, we can't even do this over the telephone anymore now that we're vaccinated. And much of the rest of this community is vaccinated, and more are getting vaccinated every day. We got to get out there. And it's not going to be easy. And in fact, it's only going to get harder. It's going to get warmer. It's going to get sweatier. It's going to get nastier. But nonetheless, we got to get out there with our VDR certification, knock on our neighbors' doors, introduce ourselves, ask them if they're registered to vote. If they're not, get them registered. Have them fill out a commit to vote card so that we can stay in touch with them going forward and make sure that they vote in the next election. If we do that, county by county, and I'm registered to do this in 4 counties. I only have 250 to go. I am convinced we will bring enough voters online that whatever the odds, whatever the rules, whatever the new voter suppression laws they pass, we will still have a chance to win this thing. These are the 3 ways in which I think that we can fight back and make the most of this. All right. Before I have a chance to hear from you, and we've got, if it works, we've got another microphone. If not, we'll yell at each other. Okay, Cynthia's going to take the mic to you. Before I do that, I thank Jim Ward for making the trip up here from El Paso. I want to thank Antonio Arellano, who's been a great Texas leader, helping to register young Latino voters especially, and doing it all over the state. We heard from Luke Warford earlier, who was just amazing, and he's heading up the voter registration program at the Texas Democratic Party, and he's carrying a clipboard around for us right now. We heard from Samantha, who helped to bring us all together. Gracie, who's doing such a great job as the chair of the party right here. And we are so proud of you and so grateful for you. I saw, is Commissioner Flores still here? We saw Commissioner Flores. We want to thank you for your public service. And I saw school board trustee Chavez, right? Lala Chavez is right here. Trustee Chavez, thank you for being here. You know, last point on this, and this is an important one. Democracy. It's got so many syllables. What does it mean? I love that somebody was going to clap for democracy, though. That was cool. But sometimes, you know, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to me? If you think about what it means for someone who cannot vote, how good is their kid's school going to be if they don't have a say in who the trustee is that represents them? How nice is their side of town going to be if they can't vote in the city council elections or don't have a say in the bond issue that comes before them? How well protected are their reproductive rights if they have no say in who the state legislator is that's making decisions on their behalf? What wars are we going to send them into if they didn't get to pick the member of Congress who's going to vote on that war? And it goes on and on and on. So this is not an abstract thing. It's not just on principle. We're not signaling our virtue right now. We're trying to make sure that we can take care of ourselves. And the way we do that in democracy is we vote. So Cynthia, if you will get her attention, she will bring you the microphone. I'll listen to what you have to say. I'll respond briefly, and then we'll bring as many people into the conversation as possible. Okay. Anyone have a question or a comment?
Right here, right here.
Thank you, Cynthia. Beto, I just want to reiterate what you've been talking about, voter registration. And I want Gracie, come here, and Sam here. We're the proof in 2018. We went out and registered 3,500 students at Tech. And Hillary Clinton got 29% in Lubbock County in 2016. With Beto at the top of the ticket, me and Gracie and Sam on the ticket, we got 35%. That's a real number that grew because we registered voters. That's not, you can sit here and we can talk about it all day, but that right there is proof in the pudding. That you get out there, we stayed out there for 5 weeks at Tech every weekday, and like I said, we registered 35. Now when we can sit here and get out there, and that was from 11 to 1 during the week. We need a goal to have people out there from 8 to 5 next fall to register 5,000 to 6,000 of those Tech students. And then, and just make the point, in 1990, the last time, when Ann Richards won her governor's race, Lubbock County carried 40% for her. We can get 40% in 2022 if we register these votes. And we've done it. We've done it in 2018, and we can do it again.
All right, I'm right here. We'll go here first.
I was recently. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was
You
recently.
gotta eat the mic on.
Oh, all right. I was recently canvassing in a special election, and on the day of voting, on voting day, the biggest barrier to people getting to their voting place, the thing that turned them away the most, was they didn't know where they needed to go. We have early voting for 2 weeks, and everybody learns you can go vote at United all over town. And then we quit that for a few days, and on election day you can't do that. And you have to go and find your polling place. And I don't know what we do to fix that, but reconciling early voting locations with voting day locations would be brilliant for getting people the information that they need to know to get them to the place where they need to vote.
I love it.
Real briefly, I think this is a great idea, and you probably know this. Some counties do that, where they have, I don't know what you call it, but like no fault any precinct voting.
Lubbock County has that.
Lubbock County has that now?
There are different voting places in early and then the election day. You can vote anywhere in the county.
Okay, great. But it's different polling place, I guess, in early voting. Gotcha. Different rules for election day versus early voting. And you know, the fact that you are so involved and that it can be confusing, the fact that I'm so involved and it can be confusing for me. Imagine if you've never voted before. Imagine if you have a criminal conviction and you just had your voting rights restored and you're going into that polling place and you worry, am I in the wrong place? Am I going to get arrested for this? That sounds crazy, right? There was a woman who was released from prison, served her time, went to a polling place to vote. They said she wasn't on the rolls, she was in the wrong place maybe. So we have this thing in Texas called a provisional ballot. We'll vote this provisional ballot, and if it turns out that you weren't supposed to vote here, we'll throw it out. If it turns out you're in the right place, we'll count it. Well, some part of her sentence had not been completely satisfied. She didn't know that. She wasn't allowed to vote. She got a 5-year prison sentence for voting at the wrong time and in the wrong place. So this confusion that we just heard about, it has a real deterrent effect on voters. So standardizing it so we're all clear on where we can vote, when we can vote, and that returning citizens can vote without fault, which is in the For the People Act as well, that would be a big improvement. All right, other questions, other comments?
Thanks. Close enough? Yep. My local voting registrar swears by the security of our voting machines. I have read that the 4 most common voting machines have been hacked within 4 minutes by a group of experts. Do ours fit? And the people that are putting this argument for us say the only secure way of voting is with paper. Can we get there?
I share your concern, and talking about Cynthia, this is going in and out. Is that one a little better? Okay. Okay. So this For the People Act that I keep talking about, this miracle voting rights bill, one of the provisions is it requires
Paper ballots, or it requires paper ballots or a paper receipt for every vote cast, so that if in the instance a voting machine is hacked, they can go back to the paper receipts on all those, or you could use just a paper-only process to be able to cast your ballot. That's one, frankly, that I feel most comfortable with. I know what my mark looks like on a ballot. I know that it's been turned in, and I know that it can't be corrupted. At least it can't be corrupted at a distance by a Russian hacker or a U.S. hacker. So that's also in the For the People Act. Yeah.
All right, we're on this side.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Cool. So, you mentioned prison voting rights earlier. Personally, I believe that we should expand voting rights to those who are incarcerated. No crime, no matter what it is bad enough to silence somebody from electing their representative. Nothing should be powerful enough to silence our voices from being heard.
Okay, so here's one of the reasons I agree with you. I mean, just on principle, based on what you said, makes sense. You've convinced me. But in Texas, we have the largest. Dang it! We have the largest prison population in the country, bar none. Right? The United States has the largest prison population on the planet, bar none. Those prison populations in America and in Texas are comprised disproportionately of black and brown Americans who themselves were disproportionately arrested for non-violent drug crimes, including in the state of Texas, believe it or not, because it's legal in most states in the country, for possession of marijuana. You could be arrested, you could be put behind bars. You can, upon release, be forced to check a box on every employment application form saying you have a conviction for using a substance that is legal in most of the country and most of the rest of the world, for that matter. White Texans, brown Texans, black Texans, all smoke pot at the same rate. I should have just said all smoke pot, period. Many people in this state do. But it is disproportionately black Texans stopped, frisked, and arrested, and incarcerated. So knowing just how unjust our system of justice is, especially when it comes to racial justice, I think denying voting rights to those formerly incarcerated or those who are incarcerated today makes no sense. Thank you for asking this and raising the point. Yeah. We've got one here in the Miscano. There's somebody in the back.
How do we get past voter apathy, or the younger people? Like I have 3 children. They all have strong opinions, but to them, and it's not just them, it's a lot of people that I hear that my vote, it's just one person, it's not going to count, it's not going to matter. And no matter how many times I have told them every vote counts, every vote matters, it just doesn't sink in. And how do we get to the younger people to get them to understand that y'all are the ones that are the ones that are going to make our lives better? We've already screwed shit up, so we need to give it to them and make sure that they understand that they've got to have the say in it. How do we do that?
Yeah. For those who couldn't hear, and I apologize for our technical difficulties, but the question is, how do we address voter apathy, especially amongst young people who think that their vote doesn't count, or it doesn't matter if they participate in an election? I think the first thing we should do, and I hope you agree, is we should listen to them about why it is that they don't vote. And what I have found when I do is that very often they're right. And I hate to admit it. You know, I used to be one of those on my high horse. If you don't vote, you get what you deserve. If you don't vote, you've lost your voice. If you don't vote, shame on you. What I've learned by listening to young people is they're incredibly smart. And they get how rigged this system is. You know, a 3-judge federal panel in 2017 described the congressional district lines in Texas as a racial gerrymander because members of Congress drew out black voters and packed them into districts where their votes really weren't going to make much of a difference. Or there's another term called cracking, where they moved them into districts where they were so outnumbered that their influence was going to be marginal at best. And it was done cynically to lessen their power at the ballot box. And many people, understandably and logically, just said, the hell with it, man. I'm not playing this game if the rules are stacked against me. I mentioned money in politics. When they see what corporations are able to buy, one donor, one guy in Midland, Odessa gave more than $1 million to our governor. There are no campaign contribution limits in the state. $1 million. You know, I was grateful for your $5. Imagine if you'd given me $1 million in that last race. $1 million, and guess what? No accident, given that he's from Midland, Odessa, that he's involved with the energy industry. And no accident that he and others who gave millions of dollars to the governor were able to determine to some degree who he appointed to the Public Utility Commission, which regulated ERCOT, which was responsible for our electricity grid, which went down in the worst winter storm we've ever had, in which 700 people died, including children who froze to death in their beds, including kids who died next to their parents from carbon monoxide poisoning as they tried to get warm in the garage with the motor running, including people who should be alive with us right now. That level of political corruption is not lost on young people. So I agree with you. I see young people who say, you know what? This thing is not for me. This is for the folks who have money. This is for the people who can pull the strings. I'm stepping out of this. But I also see young people who are leading every fight that matters to me. When it comes to gun violence, and this is a day that many of us are wearing orange to remember victims of gun violence, it is young people like those who started March for Our Lives who are demanding, pushing for, and ultimately will win gun sense legislation in every state in the union and in our U.S. Capitol. It's young people who are fighting against climate change before it is too late, making sure that we make tough political decisions now so that future generations don't bear the brunt of our mistakes. It is young people, in El Paso, Texas at least, who organized the protests against police brutality after the public murder of George Floyd. They weren't old enough to vote in some cases. They weren't holding political office. But just like all of us, they said, let's get together, step up and stand up and make sure that people hear what we're saying. And let's change the policies in our country so this doesn't happen again. So I think your challenge and my challenge is how do we bridge those two things? This fierce determination that young people have to make the world better, and they're leading on it on issue after issue. And then the very low voter turnout that we see from their peers right now. I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm going to keep beating this drum. But this bill that I keep talking about, it's passed the House and is pending in the U.S. Senate, the For the People Act, when it gets big money out of politics, when it ends gerrymandering in our system, when it levels the playing field, young people who have the most acutely tuned BS meter that one can possess, they're going to read the signals and they're going to know that this democracy works, and I bet you they're going to start voting. All right? So that's what we got to do. Thank you for asking.
A couple. Come back here locally.
I'm sorry, we can't hear, and maybe I can give you this mic.
I am the food resourcer for the South Plains Food Bank, and as a member of the food bank, a member of the family of food bankers throughout the state of Texas, 22 food banks here. I want to extend, and I know that my coworkers feel the same way, our appreciation for everything you did to publicize the plight that people went through during the pandemic. It was tremendous. It was incredible how much more of a need there was. That was comment number one. Comment number two is thank you for all you did for that, and for what you did during the winter storm and helping people when we had crews running off. Now my question, will you please run for governor?
Hey, one of the most important jobs I can think of is making sure that people can feed themselves, that kids have the calories in their system so that they can learn the next day at school, that we're taking care of one another. So I want to thank you for what you do. That's amazing. Listen, I'll tell you this. I'm going to give everything I've got to this fight for voting rights and making sure that we protect this democracy and pass it on to our kids. And after we've won that, I hope together, then I want to think about what other way I can serve you and the people of Texas. And if that's running for office, great. If it's something else, I'm good with that too. But thank you for asking.
So I just want to expand, as you're talking about voter rights, access, and having equitable access. I think the one group that is marginalized that hasn't been spoken about is the disabled community. They make up 1/6 of voting people, and if there is people that are, creating these polling sites or, getting them set up to remember the physical access piece of it. We have individuals that have wheelchairs. When I went in to vote, the platforms were so tall, individuals with wheelchairs could not access those literally to be able to see the screen to vote. So I think that's just another group that we really need to also remember as we're fighting for these equitable access to voting.
Really good point. In SB 7, for those who didn't see this, there's a provision that would require those with a disability to disclose that information to a complete stranger, to an election official. You've never had to do that in the state of Texas before. If you have a disability, we take your word for it. If you need to vote by mail, that's okay with us, all of us. And so I think about anyone with a disability having to disclose that information. You have bipolar disorder, clinical depression. You don't want to tell somebody about that, perhaps. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but that's your business. Think about that veteran who's come back from service with military sexual trauma or traumatic brain injury or PTSD. And I mean, that person almost lost their life for all of us, and now we won't take their word for it that they have a disability and they cannot come into a polling place in order to vote. We're going to make them prove that. That's an indignity that we do not need to be a part of. So I really appreciate the question or the comment to raise the profile of those with disabilities who are also impacted by this voter suppression legislation. All right, Cynthia.
What's the best way that kids can help stop racism?
So the question was, what's the best way that kids can stop racism? And I asked you, you all couldn't hear me because I didn't have the mic, if you had an idea, and you said you weren't sure that you did. You know, my honest answer is going to be what you just did, which requires a tremendous amount of courage, coming up here before all these folks in the community and asking this question. And you have forced every single person here to think about the answer to that question. What am I going to do to make sure that we stop racism or the injustice that we see in our country right now? I talked about it from a voting rights perspective, you know, making sure that everyone can vote regardless of the color of their skin or their ability or disability. But I want to think a little bit more about your question. What could I be doing more in my day-to-day life? What could you be doing as a kid who can't yet vote? What could my kids be doing? But the fact that you're here, that you asked the question, I think helps move us in the right direction. And if you come up with an answer to your question, I am all ears. One last thing that I want you to know. Did you follow what the president did this week in Tulsa, Oklahoma? So the president went to Tulsa to commemorate the 100th anniversary of a horrible massacre that took place there in 1921. There was this vibrant, successful community known as Greenwood in Tulsa, and some people refer to it as the Black Wall Street. And these successful residents of that community were set upon by their white neighbors and killed by the hundreds, and their businesses burned down and destroyed. And for generations, children your age, even those who lived in Tulsa, didn't know that that happened. It had been washed out of our history books and not remembered. And one of the things that I'm sure you've heard people say is if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. And I think what the president was trying to do is point out that history so that we don't repeat it and we don't make these same mistakes. And so I think if you will continue to study our history as a country, everyone's history in this country, I think we'll be a much better country for it. So thank you for doing this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Oliver. Can we have a big round of applause for Oliver? This is really good. Good job. That was great. Ms. Cano, yep.
So earlier you mentioned, if you have any questions or ideas, I actually have them. I think we need to hold more political events in the east side of towns because I've lived in Waco, I've lived in Austin, and I've lived in Lubbock. And usually the black side of town is usually the east side. So I think that, especially with transportation being such an issue, a lot of people that might vote, just like that story that you were talking about earlier where you were like, oh, I went into these people's houses and, you know, they were like, oh, it might take us just sitting down and talking. I think that if Texas towns talk to the east side more politically, there would be more involvement. So that's my idea.
make sure we stay in touch. Tano, can we make sure to get contact information? Thank you for being here. I don't know that I can add anything to that. More meetings on the east side of town, making sure that we bring everyone into the conversation. Are we all in agreement on that one? Okay, thank you. I like that idea. We will do it.
Hi, so I wanted to add to the comments that young lady made about the disabled community. Recently I worked at the polls for the most recent bill that was passed in Lubbock, and we did have an ASL, like, we were one of the only polls that had an ASL person or translator there. And then we did have a few polls that were accessible to the blind community, but not one person came in to use them. And I was talking to the ASL translator, and she was telling me how there's like one piece of mail that comes in with all the polls, and there's a star by the places that have things that are accessible to the disabled community. And I definitely think we need more than a star and a piece of paper to reach those people.
This is an idea. Now that we are friends with the elections administrator, or she helped us to become certified today, I want to take the idea that you just gave us and share that with her. We actually were able to register a young woman at the coffee house where we had a cup of coffee before we came over here. And I've got to turn in that voter registration form tomorrow. And when I do, I'm going to bring your great idea there. And I want to make sure that I give you credit for it. So Cynthia, if you could make sure that we get the contact information. And then based on what they say, I'd love to put you in direct touch with them. If they have questions about it, given your experience working at the polls, maybe you're the best person to answer those. So thank you for coming out and asking. Appreciate that. Yeah.
Hi. So I am a young person, and I don't like to do things through the mail. I would prefer to register online to vote. I moved here from Seattle, Washington back in August, and I went to register to vote, and I could not find a link anywhere online. I thought you could in Texas, but apparently you can't, and I learned that the hard way after taking hours searching for it. So I was just wondering if somehow we could be registering online. It would be so much easier because we can in other states, and there are like advertisements on like Facebook and Instagram and talking about reaching young people. If they can register online, they'll do it.
Yeah, and for those who don't know, and by the way, welcome to Texas. We're grateful that you're here. Yeah, we're glad to have you. Yeah, you cannot register to vote online. There is not a thing you can't do online except register to vote in the state of Texas in the year 2021. That's not by accident. It's not as though they haven't figured out the computer code, because as you just said, we do this in other states. We do this all over the world. In fact, much of the rest of the world that has a democracy doesn't require you to register at all. This is a step that's been added in the United States for some reason. But anyhow, in Texas, we just decided to make it extra hard, and it makes the victory extra sweet when we finally win, because we had to work so hard. We had to do this in person. We couldn't go online. So you need to become, if you don't mind, a certified volunteer deputy registrar, and then we got to do that one person at a time. Yeah, come on up.
Marcus, can you hear me? Okay, cool. So I am the president of my Texas Young Democrats branch at my college. We drove here an hour and a half. WT in Canyon, Texas, an hour and a half driving here.
I have my WT hat in the car.
Oh yeah, I've got my t-shirt on. I know Stuart's here from the 134 pack. We've spoken to him before. He's great. We love him. But we are holding our first public event in September since like COVID. It's a voter registration drive at our college. We do it in our big, like our food court area. We don't know what else to do. Honestly, we have like very few active members. It's a very red area. It's pretty rural. We're just kind of lost. So I think that's our biggest thing, is like finding things that we can actually do. Like, we are young. I'm 19. Like, we're just doing our best. And it's so difficult when all these kids are like, they grew up in a rural area and their parents are like, you know, very Republican. They don't even want to register to vote. They think it's stupid. Which I know someone talked about earlier, like the voter apathy. And it's really hard to get to these kids, even though we're like, you know, we don't care who you register for, we know you have to pick a party, we don't care, we just want you registered. And it's so hard to get people in there. We don't know what to do. So, I mean, if y'all got any ideas, please tell us, because we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, we do. So if you're willing to, Cynthia is going to make sure that we get your contact information and then work with you. We have a group called Powered by People, and we've got about 20,000 volunteers across the state, all of whom are working on this in, going to bars or cafes or on street corners or food banks to register people, and college campuses and high school campuses as well. Cynthia is working with a group down in Laredo, and they've been doing what you're doing on high school campuses, and over the last few weeks have registered 900 new voters in that community. We'd love to share their best practices with you, and we would like to learn what works for you in Canyon, Texas at WT, and apply that to other communities, other college campuses, other rural parts of the state. Tomorrow we're going to be in Abilene. I believe from there we're going to be in Gainesville and Wichita Falls. We'll be in Dallas, we'll be in Houston, but we're on purpose going everywhere to make sure we learn best practices from everyone. So though you said you don't know what you're doing, the fact that you drove down here, the fact that you're organized on your college campus, the fact that you're registering people leads me to believe that you do, and that we have something to learn by listening to you. So Cynthia's going to make sure that we connect after this, and let's trade best ideas. And if you're willing to work with us and all these other great organizers around the state, we would love to have you and be part of the success that you're going to enjoy there. Okay, it's a deal. All right, appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
So I was thinking about an issue that kind of came up, is that for a lot of people trying to vote, especially in bigger communities where they may have to wait hours, is what do you do about childcare if you have young kids who can't take to school for 6-7 hours to wait, a child with some sort of disability, they can't wait that long, and even if voting becomes a national holiday, which it should, what do you do then for all the kids? You may have childcare during the school day. What do you now do for that? So, and then if you are going to run for governor, please announce soon.
Yeah, so great point here about childcare. I mentioned 7 million people who are eligible to vote did not vote in 2020 for a variety of reasons. One of those could very well be the lack of childcare. If you're making $7.25 an hour at your job, and you're working 2 or 3 jobs at that, you may not be able to get off work, and your spouse or your oldest child may not be able to leave the home to go and vote because you don't have childcare. So a lot of different issues coming in there. You mentioned a national holiday to vote would help. I agree. Paying a higher minimum wage would be helpful. Having affordable childcare in this state and in this country would be an added bonus. And then making sure that no one waits 6 hours to vote, right? Why should you have to pay for 6 hours of childcare just to be able to exercise your right to participate in elections? So I think those are all part of the solution to the question. And on the other thing, I hear you, and we'll do our best. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, my name is San Juana Albiar, and I wanted to thank you for what you said about a lot of people are not registered. We were not registered. I was in my 30s with my dad, joined some kind of organization. He was 70. He got registered, him and my mom, and he went and registered all of us. And that's when we started voting. And he made sure that we voted. We worked. So he would call me and tell me, go vote tomorrow. And we would go vote. So I think that we need to encourage other people to get registered.
And after this one, we have time for 2 more.
I want to thank you for sharing that. I'm really grateful, and that's the kind of example that we need, right? And in my family as well. When I turned 18, my dad made sure that I was registered to vote, and then if we didn't vote in our family, that was, you didn't want to face my dad at the end of the day. So let's make sure that we're doing that in all of our families. I think that gets to your question too about how we build that trust and in that habit of voting in our families, especially amongst young people. So we're going to do more of that. Okay, next.
Hi. Speaking of young people, I thought I could speak to that because I am wearing a Batman t-shirt. For me and a lot of my peer group, the apathy thing, it comes from lack of results. It's a frustration of putting in the work, hitting the pavement, knocking on doors, and still the other guy gets voted in. One specific example that I think would be the part of the question. The filibuster, right? Like, recently Republicans didn't quite filibuster, so now we don't get an investigation of the seditions riot. Like, they didn't even like send a guy up to stand and talk and Jimmy Stewart's way. No, dude, yeah, we're gonna not do that. That's not what a filibuster is, but that is what the rules are. How do we get stuff done with such a stacked deck? And that's where our motivation will be.
Yeah. Talk about young people losing faith in democracy. You know, how do you explain in 2016 the person who won 3 million more votes lost the presidential election? How do you explain in 2021 when there is a proposed commission to investigate the insurrection that killed 5 people on the 6th of January, and there are 54 votes for it, and there are 36 votes against it, and it fails? How does that work? It's because you need a 60-vote threshold under the rules of the filibuster in the United States Senate. This vestige of segregation, this vestige of white planter power in the South is now determining whether we can even investigate the insurrection to try to ensure that it doesn't happen again, much less pass voting rights legislation that would secure our elections going forward. So my hope is that part of the power that the president finds and part of the power that those Senate Democrats find is the power to change the rules of the filibuster so that we can pass legislation on a simple majority. Here's the thing. I know what you're thinking, or at least what part of your brain is thinking. If we get rid of the filibuster, yes, we're going to pass voting rights. Yes, we'll pass that infrastructure bill. Yes, we might be able to do other things that are important for Democrats. But at some point, Republicans will be in the majority in the Senate, and they're going to pass everything that they want. Do you think that after all the public debate about whether or not we're going to do away with the filibuster, and all the support for doing away with it, and all the pressure on Democrats to do it, that if Democrats fail to act once Republicans are in power, that they themselves won't do away with the filibuster? It is going to happen one way or another. I'd rather it happen on our watch while we're in power so that we can actually do something with the majority that we have. That builds some trust with young people about results in government. Ms. Connell. All right, la última. Thank you for being here. This is going to be our last question.
Hi, sorry. I have more of a comment. I hope it's not a waste since it's the last one. We're talking about calling our representatives and demanding what we want. In addition to the For the People Act, we also have the federal American Jobs Plan, the infrastructure plan going through. And I think it's also important that we ask for a federal clean energy standard across all states to help support, renewable energy. And since we're on the phone and we're making those phone calls, you mentioned the Tulsa massacre, which is something that I didn't find out about when I went through the public school system. It's not something that I found out about until I was in my late 20s as a substitute teacher for charter schools. And so I think it's really important that we put history in our history books. And I think we need to call our teaching boards and whoever writes the history book, Kathleen Miller, and we need to demand that the true history is put in our history books, because they want to shove it down our throats that we can't change history. But they're changing it by not even teaching it to our children.
Yeah, that was so well said. There was a bill debated this last legislative session that would prohibit what some call critical race theory, other people call history, just knowing what happened in this country and knowing everyone's story in this country, not the select story of those who won in a given period, but everyone's story, including the story of those hundreds of families who lost a loved one in the Tulsa Massacre. And understanding that the Tulsa Massacre unfortunately wasn't exceptional. These massacres took place all across the United States. We had events like that here in the state of Texas. And it's not a proud history, but it's part of our history. And as you just said better than I could, those teachers, they should be allowed to teach. We ask them to do one of the toughest jobs I can think of, at a wage that very often forces them to work a second or a third job just to make ends meet. We ask them to deal with now permitless carry in a state that has seen far too many school shootings. So that teacher has to envision what she or he is going to do if a armed gunman comes into that school. And we're now asking them to decide what they're going to teach based on what the state legislators say is safe for the ears before them to hear, instead of what their training, their teaching history, their expertise, and their experience tells them that they should be able to do. This is one of those things that we have to stand up against. The best way to do it, in addition to calling your legislator, is if they're not listening to you, to vote them out of office in 2022. And that's what we got to do when we register all these voters after we become BDRs today. Lubbock, thank you for once again being so welcoming and so warm, for doing such a great job with the weather tonight and making sure that we could have such a beautiful evening, for putting up with our technical difficulties. This is the second stop. We were in Midland last night. I mentioned we'll be in Abilene tomorrow. We're going to be in 23 cities over the next 19 days, having the same conversation, bringing as many people in. And we're still figuring it out, and you did it with us tonight. So thank you so much. Very grateful to you all. Looking forward to seeing you again very soon, I hope. Adios.